Good morning again. I'm so excited to be with you in the house of the Lord. The title of our message this morning is really a question. Hopefully a question that we can work through as we work through the Gospel of Mark. Not the whole thing, but the first chapter, the first 14 through 20. Those verses. The question that I ask is, are you willing? You see, willingness to abandon this life of comfort and familiarity is a powerful and positive impact. A good disciple is one who seeks connections with people who do not share the same things as they do. They don't understand the same. They don't relate the same. They look for others of race and religion and political party or ideology. You see, Jesus did not begin his ministry by seeking only like-minded Galileans. Instead, he and his disciples made sacrifices, faced hardships to do the work of the healing and the teaching and the helping and the preaching. The question is, what about you? What about you today in your life? My son was telling me of one of his friends who lost his job last year. He was working in a good job, but the economy went south and so did his job, and he was the primary breadwinner for their family, and so the pressure was on. He did what is commonly referred to as networking with his friends, his associates, and he found a job with the electric power company. Wow, it was marvelous. The salary they offered him was much more than what he was making before he got laid off. There was only one catch. The job was in Louisiana. So Kent's friend left his wife and 2 children, took the family vehicle and drove 850 miles to work. So after working round the clock for 3 months, he had a little furlough and he came home for a couple of weeks. You see, he was willing to do what was necessary. Surprising, isn't it? But normally we think of a good provider as the person who sticks around. But in a world of challenges, a good provider sometimes has to be the one who leaves. The very same is true of the disciples that Jesus called. At the beginning of the Gospel of Mark, Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and he saw Simon and his brother Andrew. They were casting nets into the sea. And Jesus said to the 2 fishermen, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." What did they do? Well, Mark tells us that they immediately dropped their nets and followed him. And they left their nets, and presumably they left their families as well. You see, the Bible doesn't give us much clarity in that. The Bible doesn't tell us whether they had families. But they did say that Simon had a mother-in-law, and where there's a mother-in-law, there is usually a wife. And then Jesus saw James and John, sons of Zebedee. Remember who they were? They were called sons of thunder. So Zebedee was known as thunder. Think of that as we pursue this just a little bit. They were also fishermen. They were sitting on the shore, mending their nets, taking care of their boats. And Mark tells us again, immediately they left their father Zebedee, they left thunder, in the boat with the hired men, and they followed him, followed Jesus. A good disciple is one who leaves. The original followers of Jesus created a problem, I'm thinking, when they left. After all, fishing was a family business in that time, and Zebedee, thunder, couldn't have been very happy to have his sons leave him with the hired hands. And then he says that Simon had a house in Capernaum. And there he lived with his family, including Andrew and Simon's mother-in-law. At the very best, Simon and Andrew on the road with Jesus brings up that question, who was paying the bills? The 12 disciples may have sent money. There's no biblical evidence that they did so. In fact, there are places in the Bible where it says that the women gathered their resources together for the disciples. The disciples simply left. And Jesus was proud of them for following him. So what does that mean to be a good disciple today? We may not be challenged to quit fishing and follow Jesus, but we are supposed to lead. This means abandoning what we know and walking with Jesus in a new direction. A good disciple is one who leaves the workplace to serve. Many of us spend a great deal of our time on the job, laboring in ways that provide income for ourselves and for our families. And this is an effort that is beneficial, but you have to watch what happens, because sometimes your job takes over your life. Let me say that in a different way. How is your work to life balance? That's the question that was asked by a career guru named Jenny Unless. She points out to us that the pace of our lives today, the fact that modern technology makes it always easy for us to be contacted, also makes it difficult for us to turn the work switch off. Because if the work takes up all of our time and energy, we're going to come to a point where we're not enjoying it. Instead, we sometimes resent the work that we do. But Jesus calls us to switch off the workplace switch and serve. This might mean something like tutoring a child at risk, teaching English as a second language, swinging a hammer in the Habitat for Humanity cause. It may mean tearing down a church sign that was destroyed by the storm. It may mean helping to clean up and sanitize the sanctuary for people coming and guests coming on the following Sunday. It may mean going on a safari to hunt the gophers that make these mounds on the church property. It may mean just take a couple of hours a week to serve other people, to give them this sense of self-satisfaction that you can't find by just working. Service brings us closer to Jesus. He said to us, I did not come to be served, I came to serve. A good disciple is one who leaves the familiar for the unfamiliar. In the United States today, people are seeking out like-minded friends and neighbors who think and act and live the same way as they do. And the results of that is polarization. Americans are increasingly segregating themselves by politics and ideology. Even in their own communities, they don't have to go far. Segregation makes us more likely to demonize each other. A good disciple is one who leaves the familiar and seeks connections with people who do not share the same race, the same religion, the same political party, the same ideology. Such a person understands that Jesus didn't just begin his ministry talking with the people of Galilee. Instead, he and his disciples immediately faced a man who was challenged by an unclean spirit. Jesus immediately started curing the sicknesses of various diseases and casting out demons. He did this instead of staying home. He told his disciples, let us go into the neighboring towns so that I might proclaim the gospel to others. Jesus and his disciples did not remain in a familiar place with like-minded people. Instead, they moved into new areas to do the work of healing and teaching and helping and preaching. Yes, they ran into difficult confrontations, which is to be expected when we cross the lines of those things that we know. But disagreements are healthy and natural. Polarization is not. Polarization has a long list of negative effects. When our families are being undermined, we are less likely to help each other. We're more likely to be stressed out. Violence is more likely, and it becomes harder and harder for us to solve the problems that we face. Jesus calls disciples to make sacrifice and face hardships, like Kent Two's friend who had to travel so far just to find work. But willingness to leave, to find a workplace, to leave the comfortable and leave the familiar can be positive and can be powerful. When we reach out to others, we discover that the words of Jesus are true. The time is fulfilled, and the kingdom of God has come near. And those are the words that influence the disciples who followed Jesus. A good disciple is one who leads. Helping others becomes this foundation for their life. Kindly act once in a while isn't enough. We have to do the Good Samaritan thing more than once a day. It may mean the loss of many nights' sleep, great interactions with, and loss of our pleasures, interruptions to our business. It may mean sharing our resources, sharing our money, sharing our homes, counseling others who are in need. Your job is to be a place where you may be of maximum help to others. So never hesitate to go anywhere. That is, if you can be helpful. You should not hesitate to visit horrendous places in fear of them, but go there because it will keep you on the firing line of life, and God will keep you unharmed. One of my favorite theologians, he was also an author, he was also a pastor, Frederick Buckner. He says, if you want to understand your faith, look at your feet, because your feet are very religious. If you want to know who you are, more than just academically interested in the mystery, you can do a lot worse than just looking down at your feet for an answer. Because you see, when you wake up in the morning, called by God to be a disciple, if you want to know who you really are, look at your feet, because they will take you where you are to be. They will take you to be who you are. So when Jesus calls tomorrow morning for us to love our neighbors, even my neighbor with the dog who barks all night, it is a gift of grace and a chance for God's power to shine through my weakness. After all, there are many times I'm not the most loving, unlovable people. When Jesus calls us to invite a coworker or a friend to church, it is still a gift of grace, a chance for God's power to shine through our weakness. We are so often not comfortable with those kinds of things, but when Jesus calls us to follow him into illness, to endure a burden, this too is a gift of God's grace, a chance for God's light to shine through us. It isn't easy to believe in God's goodness and the triumph of Christ when the world puts sand spurs in our path. Every day there's an opportunity for us as disciples, for the world to watch in astonishment as we as ordinary people do non-ordinary things to undeserving people, just to show an example of God's grace and God's mercy and proof of God's power. So God didn't have to choose us, but God did choose us. God doesn't have to use us, but God uses us anyway. And in the end, it's not just blessings for us and those God called to serve. The end result is to give glory for God's name. Amen. So let's go back to the original question. The question that will stay with us for all time. Are you willing? Are you willing to be a disciple? And all the children say, Amen. Amen.